What is the greatest crossover of all time? Avengers Infinity War, Batman v Superman, that one time Keanu Reeves met SpongeBob? The list could go on and on. But I would argue, at least in the motorsport world, that the greatest crossover of all time happened in 1980s, in a beautiful match made in heaven. The World Rally Championships Group B class and their efforts to conquer the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb. In the late 1970s, Audi was developing a small truck for the German military when they had a crazy idea of putting its four-wheel drive system into a civilian car. Now, they weren't the first to have that idea. The Jensen FF predates their Quattro by 14 years, but what Audi was the first to do was take a four-wheel drive car racing, and they thought that rallying would be a perfect fit given the loose surfaces. Now, other teams thought four-wheel drive would be too complicated and too cumbersome for the rough world of rallying, but Audi's R&D season quickly shut them up. Michel Mouton and Hannu Mikkola scored 3 wins in 1981 and made rear-wheel drive all but useless. Unless you're Lancia, but we've already covered that. Lancia's success with the 037 led to the creation of the Sport Quattro in 1984, and it secured Audi's 21st rally win and 2nd World Rally Championship. But something else arrived in 1984, Peugeot. They took Audi's four-wheel drive philosophy and applied it to a lightweight hatchback. And then they made that hatchback mid-engined to solve the Quattro's atrocious weight distribution problem. And despite the various evolutions of the Sport Quattro, they just couldn't stop the Peugeot steamroller. Audi scored just 2 more wins to Peugeot's 16. But there is one rally stage that Audi had sort of a monopoly on because nobody in Europe knew it existed. Pikes Peak. The Pikes Peak International Hill Climb is America's 2nd oldest motor race, getting started all the way back in 1916, and it takes the sport of hill climbing to the absolute extreme. Normal European hill climbs tend to be short sprints up twisty rural roads that take a few minutes. Pikes Peak starts 9,395 feet above sea level, and then climbs almost a whole mile farther up to over 14,000 feet. And it's not just the elevation that is incredibly taxing. The course itself stretches 12.4 miles and has 156 corners with no guardrail, preventing your oxygen-starved brain from flinging your car off a mountain. And even crazier than that, it's one of the few unlimited motorsports left in the world, so provided your car met the basic safety requirements of the era, you could bring anything your heart desires. Let me spell that out as clear as I possibly can to tell you how crazy that is. Up until 2005, Pikes Peak was a 100% dirt hill climb. And you went nearly 3 miles up into the stratosphere, almost halfway to the cruising altitude of a commercial airliner, and you raced up said dirt mountain in crazy powerful over-the-top machinery with no guardrail, in an era where crash safety was not exactly a high priority for motorsports. Yeah. And the fact that it was dirt meant it was basically the most intense rally stage in the world. And for Audi, it was perfect. The hill climb gave them the most intense testing ground for their WRC car that anyone could ask for, while staying off of most of Europe's radar. They first summited the mountain in 1982 with their original Quattro design, so it was a heavy, four-wheel drive coupe with its 300 horsepower inline-5 hanging all the way in front of the front axle. But it still decimated that year's rally class, primarily because the other competitors included a 71 Camaro, a Dodge Aspen, and a Blazer. So it was over 2 minutes faster than its rally rivals, but it was still 40 seconds off the pace of that year's record setter. And that Quattro would win the World Rally Championship that year. so they had a lot to do if they wanted to win Pikes Peak. The 1983 A1 Quattro was not that, because it only had a mild horsepower bump, and that was pretty much it. So the results were shockingly the same. It destroyed the rally class once again, since the next fastest car was a Jeep, but it was almost a minute slower than Al Unser Jr.'s custom-built open-wheeler. But in 1984, the Sport Quattro arrived, and Audi's fortunes began to change. By cutting over a foot from the wheelbase, the Quattro got lighter and more nimble. The carbon Kevlar body also helped keep the weight down, and 450 horsepower made it even faster accelerating. And they had Michelle Mouton behind the wheel once again. She drove the Quattro to a sub-12-minute run during testing, but luck was not on her side in the actual race. Engine problems as she started passing through the clouds meant she finished second overall, 25 seconds faster than Mazda's RX-7 rally car, but 26 seconds down on an outright win. So 1984 was both disappointing and reassuring, as it showed the true potential of the Sport Quattro and the whole Audi team. Meanwhile, across the pond, the 1985 rally program was reaching its zenith as the Group B war entered its final phase. The Quattro S1E2 was a snowplow-wearing 600 horsepower monster that was built to do battle with the WRC rivals like Peugeot and Matcha. It also sucked up most of the R&D budget for Pikes Peak, which meant the Colorado crew was given a revised 1984 Sport Quattro. This 1985 model had a smaller fuel tank and more titanium parts to reduce weight. Then they turned the turbo pressure for the high altitude up to make 500 horsepower, and Mouton was once again tasked with taking the overall win. So she kicked her co-driver out and began memorizing all 156 corners to save even more weight. And she familiarized herself with the car on the local back roads, which earned her a few speeding fines and a ban on driving in Colorado, barring the actual event. Now this was, truth be told, likely just to piss off the foreigners trying to win the national event, but it didn't matter. The car ran faultlessly this time, and Mouton was driving like a true WRC champion she nearly was. Even though the conditions weren't as perfect as qualifying, she destroyed Unser's record by 13 seconds. She was, and currently remains, the only woman to set a record at Pikes Peak. However, she left Audi Sport in 1986, so the Pikes Peak drive for that year went to someone who knew a thing or two about the mountain, 9-time winner Bobby Unser. And now they had finalized the Quattro S1E2 with 600 horsepower on tap and an air recirculation system designed to reduce turbo lag by constantly spinning the turbines. It also had the WRC's significantly more aggressive aerodynamics to increase downforce, which comes in handy at 14,000 feet as the air gets thinner. And Bobby drove it superbly, yet again setting the record, beating Mouton by 14 seconds, meaning yet another Unser had claimed yet another record at Pikes Peak. And then in 1987, something changed. Group B was replaced with Group A, and Peugeot's 205 T16 was without a place to race. I mean, yeah, they took it to the Dakar Rally and it was very successful, but Rally Raid isn't really the home of such specialized high-speed machinery. So they looked at the buzz Audi was getting for setting Pikes Peak record after Pikes Peak record, and wanted some for themselves. So they showed up with, essentially, the planned Evo 3 variant of the 205 T16 Evo 2. So the Evo 3 had a slightly longer wheelbase, a new 6-speed gearbox, and even ground effect side skirts. And since Pikes Peak was an unlimited series, Peugeot didn't have to worry about minimum weight requirements, which allowed the 205 Evo 3 to weigh under 1,900 pounds. Peugeot also brought Ari Vatanen back for his return to racing after his near-fatal accident in 1985. And I gotta say, kind of a dick move. Peugeot getting the guy who just recovered from a near-fatal rally accident his first gig back at the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb, which I've already described to be one of the most insane races on the planet. It's definitely throwing him back in the deep end. But Audi had not slacked off either. With Group B dead in their Trans Am series beginning next year, Audi wanted to send off their rallying career on a high and took their entire WRC budgets to this one event. The S1E2 Pikes Peak was the ultimate Quattro. So, you're probably curious how these vehicles compare, so let's just get it out of the way, alright? Peugeot showed up again with the Evo 3 variant of their Group B engine to make around 600, maybe 650 horsepower depending on the turbo volume. Audi wanted to make sure they recovered Peugeot's efforts and brought a revised Group B engine like Peugeot, only this one made 750 horsepower. And to cool that engine, a massive air intake was carved into the roof. And then they removed even more weight to 2,200 pounds, which brought it closer to 50-50 weight distribution. And then there was the aerodynamics. The normal S1E2's aero kit was exceptional, but the Pikes Peak one was on another level. The rear wing grew another rear wing on top of it with massive side panels that stretched down to the fenders, while the front snowplow grew, guess what, another wing on top of the snowplow. It's a comical car, and it really cemented that the late 80s was a defining moment that cemented the aerodynamic style that would become necessary at Pikes Peak going forward. And it was a style that Peugeot didn't have, because again, it was basically just the evolution of their rally car. So it had normal Group B rally wings and canards. So they were over a minute slower than Audi, and everyone was freaking out because they had no idea what to do until one of their engineers looked at their quote-unquote normal-looking hatchback and compared it to the scaffolding convention that was the Audi and decided that if they couldn't beat them, they should join them. So they bought some aluminum panels from a local store and started building wing extensions on the spot. And the results were dramatic. They shaved 80 seconds off of their previous time and started to give Audi a run for their money. The final car had a massive front aero kit with a new wing and canards, while the rear wing had another wing bolted on top of it, literally. But sadly for Peugeot, Vatanen's car had a broken turbo clamp, which was devastating in the final stage, so Walter Roll and Audi would take another win and beat their previous record for the third time in a row, shaving almost 40 seconds off of their first outright record from 1985. Roll's time of 10 minutes, 47 seconds, and 85 milliseconds was the first sub-11-minute run in Pikes Peak, but it wouldn't stand for long. One of the reasons Audi was so much quicker than Peugeot was because of its longer wheelbase, which made it more stable in the long, high-speed corners. Peugeot couldn't stretch the 205 out any further, so they switched to a brand new 405 for 1988. And that meant they tragically gutted their 205 hill climb cars to shove their components into a 405 space frame. And I gotta be honest, the 405 T16 was the most advanced car to ever hit dirt at the time. The aero kit was much less DIY than the 205 from the previous year, and it had a lot more horsepower. They followed Audi's approach and brought 800 horsepower to Pikes Peak that year. Then the driver was given on-the-fly adjustable differential and four-wheel steering, something that even F1 cars didn't have and still don't have, unless you count Mercedes in 2020. All in all, it was just 1,900 pounds, and with Audi gone to circuit racing, the result was predictable. Peugeot dominated that year with a 1-2 finish that was 30 seconds clear of the next fastest competitor. But the question was, did it beat Audi's record, the sub-11-minute run? Yes, by 0.6 of a second. It wasn't much. Only being faster by 0.6 of a second basically means the 405 T16 and the Quattro Pikes Peak were tied. They're identical in terms of performance, but it doesn't matter if you win by an inch or a mile. Winning's winning. That's gotta be one of the closest records ever broken, like in terms of gap, because they're very different vehicles. The Quattro was front-engined, big old brute of a car with lots of aero, while the Peugeot is much more advanced with four-wheel steering and the mid-engine layout, and they were pretty much neck and neck for the entire stage. That is seriously impressive. Peugeot won again in 1988 with Robbie Unser, although it did not go any faster than their previous record, which would actually end up standing for 6 years. And after Peugeot left in 1988, rally cars would never really return to Pikes Peak. Yeah, I know the Toyota Celica won in 1994, but it shared virtually nothing with its Group A WRC counterpart. But now we seem to be in a new era of Pikes Peak, as Volkswagen beat Peugeot's 208 T16 record of 8 minutes 13 seconds with their all-electric Volkswagen ID.R. And to quote Peugeot's boss directly, "I was very disappointed by Volkswagen, as I thought for sure they could have done much better. There's at least 10 to 15 seconds more to be taken from the record." Now that could just be a general case of French smack-talking the Germans, but we'll have to wait and see if they own up to their challenge. Either way, Pikes Peak is getting a lot more attention, especially after it celebrated its 100th anniversary. And now we have new rivalries coming out, mainly for fastest production car up the mountain. But that overall record is set, and it's up to others to see if they can beat the mighty electric car with internal combustion, or if it will be all electric from this point on.